Unfiltered. Like you're in another world, like you zoned out. You know what I'm saying?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Unfiltered. I'm your host, Georgii Speakman, and this week I get the opportunity to chat to yet another internationally best-selling co-author of mine from the AI revolution thriving within civilization's next big disruption. She happens to also be Australian. I'm loving this process because I'm actually connecting with a couple of co-authors from my homeland, being Australia. Lisa Goodhand, a dynamic entrepreneur, digital strategist, and a specialist in China-Australia trade relations, which is incredible. I happen to have a crush on Mandarin. I don't know if it's Mandarin that you're fluent in, Lisa.
Yes,
Lisa, it is. That's awesome.
yes.
So we're going to get you speaking Mandarin on today's interview. So Lisa has helped Australian businesses successfully enter and navigate the very complex Chinese market. It might not be so complex for Lisa, given she's been an expert in the space for almost since the 80s when she started learning the language. She's fluent in Chinese, has obviously harnessed and harbored a deep understanding of the China market, Chinese social media platforms in cost-effective digital strategies that have driven brand awareness and sales. And her holistic experience goes beyond just market research and into branding, e-commerce, and even the influencer sort of space, which is a space I'm very familiar with myself, and a focus on empowering SMEs or SMBs to expand internationally. So welcome to the show, Lisa.
Well, thank you so much, Georgie. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I hope you're nice and warm over there, because here in Australia it's a little bit chilly.
It is certainly hot as hell, and it's really funny because the irony here is that Lisa and I had some technical difficulties getting started into our interview today, which is hilarious, given we're both in tech and we've written a book on AI, and here we are struggling to get the basics of internet happening, but it gets to the best of us, which is funny. So again, guys, a reminder of our book, The AI Revolution. This was happened to be an internationally best-selling book in markets, the US, Canada, Germany, and Australia. 34 global AI experts. Every single one of us is operating from a different space. Lisa, being the expert that she is in trade relations and more, has written a chapter by the name of AI, the Silk Road, and the Next Great Trade Revolution. Lisa quoted a quote in the beginning of her chapter: "The new Silk Road is digital and AI is its backbone." So Lisa, how on earth did you get started, or where did the attraction and entry point into China really kick off for you? Was it just because you were learning the language in school? Were you connected to a family that happened to already have a footprint in that market? Share with the audience today how it all kicked off for you.
Okay, great. Well, my introduction to Chinese actually did start at school. And funny enough, I grew up in a small town called Darwin. Well, not so small now, but you'll probably be, for you, Georgia, you'll know where Darwin is. It's in the north of Australia.
Yes.
In those
I
days,
have
wasn't
been
it?
there one time.
Yeah, very hot. Probably very similar to where you are.
Very, yes.
We didn't even have many Chinese people in Darwin at that time, because I think you've already given away how ancient I am, a little bit like Marco Polo. But I was really fortunate. I had an opportunity to learn Chinese at high school, and we had a fabulous Chinese teacher who just made it really interesting and really fun. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for this. And then I was looking for an exit strategy out of Darwin, as most teens do when they kind of getting towards the end of high school. And somebody gave me the bright idea of studying Chinese at university. And so that's kind of how it all ended up. And I took off to Canberra in the ACT, and I studied Chinese as my major at the ANU. So that's kind of where it all began. And it's been a love story ever since then.
That's really, really incredible. And I truly, truly admire that. You wouldn't believe this. And I can't believe we have this very random thing in common, although it's nothing like what you've accomplished, obviously. But I did actually have a crush on Mandarin. I did study it in Adelaide for 6 months. I actually gave it up because all my counterparts in the group class were too slow. And I was speeding ahead with Mandarin at the time. There was a lot of, not pressure, but obviously encouragement on a lot of Australians, which I'm sure you'd agree with, for
Yeah.
us to learn Mandarin for obvious reasons. We're sort of on the border of China and that whole APAC region. But I did have a website as an actress back in 2007, 2008, and I actually
Yeah.
had it translated into Mandarin because there were a couple of
Oh,
expats
good.
that believed there were a lot of opportunity there. I also asked my father when I was in my early 20s if I could go and study Mandarin in either Beijing or Shanghai for 6 months to a year while studying martial arts. The answer
Wow,
was no.
cool.
The answer was no. But it's random that I just have this, a bit of a crush on Mandarin. So on that note, would you mind speaking in some Mandarin to me just so I can get my little
Oh,
fit?
okay. What should I say? Georgie, 我今天非常高兴有这个机会跟你讲话。
Oh, because all I can remember really to say is 你好吗? And
你好。
then there was like a 我很好你的请问你贵姓你叫什么名字 but none of it correlates. None of it makes sense. They're just the words in sentences I remember.
No, I think they're the first sentences everyone learns because my son's actually studying Chinese in high school at the moment, and he has exactly the same vocab as you.
It's hilarious. And yeah, so I mean, a remarkable language. Obviously, we could, our time is short on this interview because just with this particular initiative, we're keeping interviews down to 25 minutes, 30 minutes or
Sure.
so. And, but otherwise I could keep talking to you about Mandarin for a while. Lots of incredible learnings and references in your chapter, Lisa. Thoroughly, thoroughly enjoyable. Very, very insightful. I love that you reference Jack Ma and Alibaba because I was working in the startup world in Los Angeles as Alibaba was funding a lot of startups and it was getting a lot of attention from the venture capital market, Silicon Beach, Silicon Valley at the time.
Yeah.
Tell me more about, just your learnings from operating with the Chinese market, having met some of these characters very early on in your career and how that has ended up influencing your journey into tech and AI?
Yeah. So I started my company in 2008, and in those days, probably the relationship with China was good. A lot of businesses knew that there were opportunities in China, especially as a manufacturing hub for the purpose of importing. And for me, I had been to China many times already. I'd actually lived over in China, had the benefit of studying in university in China and also working at a young age in a five-star hotel. In fact, it was so early in those days. It was at the very beginning of China initiating the whole five-star hotel journey. And so
Wow.
my role as a 21-year-old was to help the hotel chain kind of practice the five-star etiquettes that the staff needed to know, which was really funny because I was still quite young and, my version of five-star still fairly new. But when I started my company, the idea was to help Australian business owners because I could see that there are a lot of problems in trying to source manufacturers and to work and import
Right.
from China just purely because of the language, and the language is such a large barrier. You're lucky during probably the era that you were thinking about learning Chinese, it had become quite popular for a while.
Yeah.
The government was spruiking it. It was kind of common through the schools. When I learned Chinese, I actually graduated with 3 people at university in Chinese language, so it wasn't quite so cool then.
The Red Gem.
And
Red Gem.
yeah, and even now, it is hard to find schools that offer it with live, live teachers. A lot of the learnings are online these days if you want to learn a language like Chinese. But in any case, my goal was to really help build a bridge between China and Australia because I knew that there are great products to be found and that, just with language and an understanding of the business culture and practices that, great quality could be achieved as well. So I cut my teeth in the early days in helping Australian importers head over to China. I visited thousands of factories. I've been to everything
Incredible.
from toilet manufacturers to boot manufacturers to stainless steel and, all kinds of crazy factories to help my customers source and procure the best products and work with the factories to make sure they got the quality. With time, though, and I kind of started to realize that export was becoming, you know, really popular subject in Australia. We, as you know, Georgie, we manufacture a lot of great produce, a lot of great products.
Yeah.
Even the service industry is really highly regarded in many countries. And, you know, exports were becoming really popular, and China had a huge demand for our products and services. So I probably after about 10 years, I moved across into the export space and started to help Australian exporters kind of understand the market entry environment. And again, there were a new set of challenges, some of them the same, language, cultural barriers, etc. But then, of course, things like getting products registered in China, understanding the Chinese customer mindset, which markets to kind of enter, how to set up supply relationships and things like that. So I moved fairly heavily into the export space. But one of the things that really stood out to me was that as an exporter, it was very hard in China to build a brand. I mean, if you were a big brand, there's a lot of marketing money behind you. You'd recognize globally, and kind of there was a more ease to access for your products in China. But for a lot of businesses in Australia, and the majority of our businesses are made up by SMEs or small and medium-sized enterprises, you know, they really didn't have that marketing budget. And so
Right.
for a country like China, as big as it is, and if you think of China and think of Europe and like kind of parallel them together and overlay them on top of each other, that's the size and complexity of the China market. There are literally over 200 different dialects there. You know,
Right.
each market is so different. And so for SMEs, yes, they had great products. Yes, they could put them on a ship and send them to China. But, you know, how could they access those markets? How did they know what their customers wanted, and how could they get to those customers? So, I talk about Jack Ma because I think he was really instrumental in the beginning stage of building that two-way cross-border trade when he set up Alibaba, which is a
Mhm.
huge website, and anyone
Yeah.
in trade kind of has heard of Alibaba. It was an opportunity for exporters globally, not just Australians, to put their products online and, you know, share information. I mean, initially it was primarily set up for Chinese manufacturers to market to the world, but eventually became a global platform. So, you know, it kind of, I clued on that, you know, the internet was becoming something really important. And, you know, when you're as old as I am, back in the dinosaur days, you know, we didn't have internets or iPads, or, you know, I still remember my dad buying our first computer when I was probably in high school and having to learn how to type because I literally, you know, had never seen a computer before.
Absolutely.
It was so cool. The old
Oh, you
dial-up
no, you
internet
did it all.
access.
Oh, yeah, for sure. No, I remember dial-up. I remember dial-up for sure. No, I'm really happy I was born in the early 80s because I've seen, you know, just everything like started on typewriter, writing on a typewriter through to all the things, you know, so I love that. You
Yeah,
referenced, again, so many great things in the chapter, but Australia's digital awakening, which
yeah,
your reference here sort of kicked off through COVID-19. You say, but few realize that AI was already working behind the scenes, driving this transformation. As Australia found its footing post-pandemic, AI became the real catalyst for change. Businesses that had rushed into digital tools started turning to AI-powered solutions to optimize operations, increase efficiency, and expand into new markets and so on. So
yeah,
AI wasn't obviously just helping them survive; it was pushing them forward. A lot of
yeah.
people don't realize that AI has been around for a really long time, at least a
Mm,
couple of decades, and was known as sort of referred to as transformers. But you know, to your point, AI was already working behind the scenes. Question for you though: do you think that? What's your opinion on where and how and why COVID perhaps happened? Are you a bit of a conspiracy theorist? Do you think that maybe we were catapulted into that state of play so that we did launch more proactively into the realms of AI to exacerbate this growth and transformation?
You know, it's a really good point, and maybe in the case of Australia, it could be very valid because, you know, I'll give you a very funny, quick story. Pre-COVID, I was working with the Chamber of Commerce in Southern Australia, and we had developed a training platform to help small businesses access the China market. And I'd said to the business chamber, because she'd expressed an issue in being able to reach out to all of the SMEs, because some of them live on farms, some of them live, regionally. It's very hard for them to all to come into one place to have a training session. I said, well, there's this great tool. It's called Zoom, and we can give them a Zoom login and they can access it. And she took it out to the SMEs and came back to me, and the course never went ahead because she said, the business owners feel that Zoom is too advanced. It's too technologically
Wow.
advanced. We're going to
Wow.
have problems trying to log in. And I really, I remembered it so vividly because that was just pre-COVID. And if you think about it, post-COVID, or actually because of COVID, Zoom just, if you'd had shares in Zoom, you'd be a millionaire right now because
Right.
Zoom took off, right? It became the only way that people could actually communicate. So, yeah, I think for Australia, maybe we needed that shake-up because my experience pre-COVID in dealing with small and medium-sized business owners, and we were talking about everything from simple things like, let's make a website, let's put your products online, let's build e-commerce. And they were like, oh, I don't know, that sounds all very hard. And we talk about Facebook and they're like, oh, we don't use Facebook, that's for our kids. And we're like, come on, you need to use it to market. But for a lot of small businesses and even medium-sized businesses, there was a lot of kind of concern over whether or not digital was for them. And COVID just kind of cemented that idea that, no, you cannot live like this. You need to move forward. E-commerce is essential. And, even in Australia, I think, I'm not sure if it's this book or another kind of writing that I wrote about some of the even larger companies like, Harvey Norman. I remember seeing on the news people like Jerry Harvey talking about e-commerce and kind of saying, oh, we don't need to do that yet. It's still face-to-face. People want to
Totally.
have a shop front, So whether or not there was a conspiracy, it was definitely well orchestrated if it was, but certainly COVID was the big game changer for
Oh, yeah.
business on the front. Yeah.
It's funny. I remember in 2018, I'd started my business, or at least got it registered, and got my visa through my O1, so I was able to kick my business off again in LA, November 2018. Obviously, was only several months later that COVID hit. So just as I was getting off the ground with doing lots of talent deals and collaborations and partnerships and activations and in-market experiences, to your point, it was sort of all halted, and loads of these major brands had to recalibrate on their market position and we were able to just kick off more digital campaigns and things like that. It was also around a time where a lot of the LA, it was funny because I worked for my first job in LA was working for Resolution Agency, which was a new wave sort of talent agency founded by two major sort of ex-heads of the largest talent agencies in the world out of LA. And but it was backed by Chinese investment money. However, I think it was in 2014 the Chinese investment money had fallen through, but at that time a couple of the agents were some of the only agents in the entire sort of market representing a lot of Chinese talent, and also looking at digital collaborations and deals with a lot of the Chinese social media platforms. So that leads me to my next sort of point. You make reference here to AI, social commerce, and the new global marketing playbook. In China, once dictated by business success, social commerce has taken over. So there are obviously platforms in China like WeChat, you've got RedNote, and you've got China's version of TikTok, etc. What type of differences have you seen in the way deals are constructed, how partnerships are facilitated, how they're leveraging these platforms between sort of the Western world and the likes of China? And would you just, what are the competitive differences? Just talk to some of that, because I think it's a really curious point for a lot of us that are in that space. And influence and marketing hasn't sort of slowed down. It's just continued to shape shift into lots and proliferate into lots of different sort of places, spaces, platforms, opportunities, all the things.
Yeah. It's an interesting space, and there's kind of two discussions there for me, obviously on the export front and then on the e-commerce or cross-border trade front, which is slightly different products. But the influencer side of things, influencers have changed a lot. They've actually kind of become more popular, if anything, because of COVID. And to give you an example, you may have heard of the word Daigou. So pre-COVID in Australia, Daigou was becoming very popular. And what Daigou is Chinese, the Chinese people living in Australia would have access to Western brands and products that they would buy and then take back and sell to China. And with time, that became popular using apps like WeChat. And
Yes.
yeah, so people would come on big shopping excursions, buy lots of products, fill their suitcases up, and send them back. And then that kind of formalized, and these people then started to open little shops in Australia. I'm not sure if you saw them in the US, but these shops would have all of the top brands that sold to China. So everything from infant formula through to vitamins and like honey and lamb's wool and things that Chinese the customers really wanted but didn't have huge access to in mainland China. So these Daigou's would have shops that catered to them, and they used apps like WeChat, which is one of the largest apps in China, to communicate with their customers, and the e-commerce transaction would take place on WeChat. When COVID came, logistics just almost came to a halt. It was very complex. It became very hard to get products in and out. It became very expensive. And so the whole logistics supply chain made selling and sending these products back to China really hard. The other problem that happened is that people couldn't travel. So the Chinese people coming into Australia to buy Australian products, the gates were shut, so that couldn't happen either. And so, that whole Daigou network really started to come to a halt and almost stopped post-COVID. And that we're talking a couple of years of closed gates for Australia. Post-COVID, these Daigous had to reinvent themselves almost, and that's when the real influencer market in Australia became popular. And I think it became popular for other countries as well. And so all of a sudden, those Daigous that no longer had that role started to kind of really position themselves as influencers. In the old days, influencers, you probably remember, influencers were really only people that had real celebrity that would go on and now you can be an influencer because posting really good content, whatever that may be, and it's regular. So those Daigous, who they were Chinese locals that had a knowledge of what Chinese consumers back in China wanted, would go and then visit shops and make themselves famous by going to restaurants and posing with at lavender farms and things like that. So it really changed that whole market to the point now where I talk with a lot of Australian businesses who want to gain access to those local Chinese speaking influencers that are using RedNote and using WeChat channels and TikTok or Douyin to pitch their brands, and they know that audience is not just main Australia China-based Chinese based in Australia, but also Chinese in mainland China. So Australian brands working with local Chinese influencers based here to push content through RedNote because they know that will project back to China. And so that helps them build their brand in China. It's a great option because it's cheaper and quicker, right? Cheaper than going to China, finding an influencer, working with a company over there. You actually have that ready-made influencer here in Australia using the same social media platforms that your customers over in China have access to. So that influencer market has kind of evolved with time and changed a little bit in the way that it's dynamic. I've also seen a lot of changes with RedNote. I think there was a little bit of discussion around TikTok in America recently, as you're probably well aware of. And we saw quite a few American influencers even come over to RedNote, which formerly called Xiaohongshu. So I'm starting to even see now a lot more English coming through RedNote, which previously was 100% Chinese, but now is even becoming more like there's more English coming through for sure. And what RedNote's done is they have some really great tools on the platform to help with translation as well. So you can instantly translate content as you're watching it to make sure that you have access to what's being said and offered, which is, part of the AI revolution and kind of evolution of what an influencer can do these days. It's not just about the piece to camera, it's also everything else.
It is. It's offline experiences. It's sometimes experiences not using social media or digital at all, but still being an influencer and knowing that you're an influencer and being able to activate that word of mouth marketing through elite circles. There's just so many different angles to it. I agree. These days, there's a gamer market, the list goes on. I'm curious, like as an Australian living in America, I've been here for over a decade now, just over 12 years to be exact. and then particularly with the changes in leadership politically, with Trump now in power and a lot of the controversies around tariffs and just the China, the trade war and all these different things. I'm just curious, like as an Australian that is doing business in China, and that I imagine is somewhat familiar with the political landscape of America. What is the general sentiment between all the markets? Like, what's your take on all of it? I've got Chinese family members. My cousin's husband is Chinese. My father's partner is she's Chinese. And it's just really interesting hearing so many different people's perspectives, right, from different sides of the fence. She happens to have a commerce business, online fashion, and all the rest. So I've heard things from her and that side of the fence, but she's Australian based. Tell us and just share your perspective on perception, this trade war, the political landscape, maybe the Chinese perception of America, like all of the things, anything that you're willing to share, please share.
Well, it is definitely interesting times, and maybe like you said before, when COVID came, it was a bit of a reset. I think in terms of trade flows, there's probably a bit of a reset going on. My view, look, Australia's really struggled as well post COVID. The government that we had in power at the time was kind of a little bit, anti-China, and sentiment certainly on the ground was there were challenges at the time, and it really caused a fair amount of damage between the two countries. Australia and China have a great historical relationship. We've been trading and worked together for over 40 years. We've really had a strong relationship. So that period really did a lot of damage to business and trade at the time. But we've seen a lot of positive changes come since the change of government. We just had our own Prime Minister visit China. We're starting to re-engage and reconnect on a trade front. We've had our own tariff embargoes and restrictions as well over the course of the last kind of 5 or so years. They're starting to soften up a little bit, and we're learning how to communicate better once again, because I think, that there was definitely a communication problem. I think moving forward, I think the dynamics of the relationship will change. Business still needs to be done. There's still a very big reliance on China as the manufacturing hub of the world. China won't stop. China will find another way to continue to do trade. And, I'll give you a good example. In Australia, there were a few issues in the past around Huawei, which is a major, Huawei was wanting to set up some business in the communication sector in Australia, and there were a few issues around that, and it didn't go ahead. And Huawei globally, there have been restrictions on what Huawei can do in other countries. So when I visited China a month ago, I didn't realize how much Huawei had gone and recalibrated and decided that, their main market, initially is in China. And if the rest of the world's not going to let them in parts due to communication, cybersecurity issues, things like that, they will reinvent themselves. And I walked into a Huawei store, and you may know Huawei from their mobile phones. Most countries have Huawei phones. Yeah. And I didn't realize how much work they'd actually done in rebranding themselves. I walked into a Huawei store, and it was a mega store, but it wasn't just a phone store. So in front of me were phones, mobile phones. To the right of me was brand new Huawei laptop computer, but it wasn't just a laptop. It was almost like 2 iPads conjoined together in the middle, and you open it and you can turn it that way, and the bottom iPad can be the typing iPad, or you can open it straight up and it turns into a big flat screen TV, like it's actually huge. But they use their own technology, so they're not compatible with like Apple or Android. So that's the computer section. Then I went across, and then there was the mobile phone section, which had a 3Z fold out mobile phone. So you might have seen the two phones that fold out. This one was a 3, so it actually expanded out to a massive big phone like that, and you could close it back in 3-fold, like a 3-fold brochure. So that was pretty cool. And then in the next section with the car section. So Huawei actually has its own EV cars now, and these are next level new tech. So in Australia, we've got EVs. We're still kind of battling with the challenge of, battery technology and recharging stations and trying to, move people across to EVs. In China, EVs are prolific. The uptake has been huge, and brands like Huawei even have their own EV.
Hi, everyone. Just looping back here to say that unfortunately we lost Lisa Goodhand at the end of that conversation there. Funny that we're on subject of AI, technology, innovation, and we are facing straightforward tech and connectivity issues. I'm in the US, Lisa is traveling, but nonetheless, we still managed to get a fairly decent dialogue in together as co-authors on the AI revolution thriving within civilization's next big disruption. So thank you so much for making it this far into the dialogue. Please share, like, comment, and all the rest, and subscribe. Just want to say thank you again, and stay unfiltered in your AI journey. Here's to the future of artificial intelligence. And I do hope that you've enjoyed the conversation. Scroll through this playlist for conversations with the other female authors as a part of this very series. Ciao for now.
Unfiltered. Like you're in another world, like you zone out. You know what I'm saying?